If everyone can find a seat, that would be great. If you don't have a seat, we'll bring out more chairs. My name is Sarah Yoon, Director of Public Affairs and Regional Issues at the Korea Economic Institute. And on behalf of KEI and the Project 2049 Institute, we welcome you to this Korea-China Forum event. And we are very pleased to welcome you to this particular Korea-China Forum event because this forum began in 2005 during the fourth round of the six-party talks. But now, this year, we are revamping the forum with a new partnership with the Project 2049 Institute, and we're very, very pleased about that. So thank you to Mr. Shriver and also to Russell and everyone at Project 2049 Institute. Today's Korea-China Forum is titled The Role of North Korea and Taiwan in Korea-China Relations. The U.S. and North Korea have recently been signaling potential thawing in their relationship. And just today, there was an article out about how South Korea no longer views Taiwan as a direct competitor or rival. So how does China play into these relationships and dynamics? And our speakers will discuss in detail about this key question. We have two speakers and a commentator and moderator today. And before we dive into discussions, please allow me to introduce them to you. Our first speaker is Dr. Kwei-bo Hwang, who is the Associate Professor in the Department of Diplomacy at the National Chengchi University in Taipei. He's also a visiting fellow at the Center for Northeast Asian Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. And from February 2009 to January 2011, he was the chairman of the Research and Planning Committee in the Republic of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Prior to that, he was a Fulbright visiting scholar at SAIS Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Hwang was recruited to President Ma Ying-jeou's campaign team between the second half of 2011 and January 2012, dealing with international affairs and press. Our second speaker will be Dr. Yong-hyun Kim, who is the assistant professor at the Department of North Korean Studies at Dongguk University in Seoul, Korea, and he has held that position since 2006. He's also the special director of the Korean Political Science Association, Director of the North Korea Research Association, Policy Advisor to the Ministry of Unification, Advisor to the Ministry of Government Legislation, among many other affiliations that he has currently. Our commentator and moderator for today will be Mr. Randall Shriver, who is the President and CEO of the Project 2049 Institute. He's also the founding partner of Armitage International and a senior associate at CSIS. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2003 to 2005, and a Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to then Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage. Prior to his work at the State Department, he was an independent consultant and a visiting fellow at CSIS. He has also served as an active duty naval intelligence officer. So we look forward to hearing from our speakers and our commentator on today's topic of the role of North Korea and Taiwan in Korea-China relations. But before we dive into the discussions, please allow me to go over some housekeeping rules. I know some of you are cramped in the back, but we hope to make some more space for you in the back. Also, Dr. Kim will be speaking in Korean. So those of you who are not bilingual in Korean and English, we have those headphones laid out for you. And if you need one and didn't get a headphone, then please find one of the KEI staff who's standing around and we'll try to help you. Just a reminder that the channel for simultaneous interpretation will be set to channel 1. Because of battery capabilities, if you wouldn't mind waiting to turn the machine on until Dr. Kim starts speaking, that way you can have their interpretation earphones and machines for the duration of the seminar. So thank you for your cooperation. And again, if you need any help with interpretation, we'll be around to help. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Hwang.
And before I begin my talk, I would like to express my greatest gratitude to KEI and Project 2049 Institute for inviting me to this very meaningful event. I think my time is only about 15 minutes, so I try to limit my talk to two big dimensions. The first one is, of course, Taiwan's role in the region, especially in South Korea mainland China relations. The second would be how South Korea should view Taiwan in its relations with mainland China. That will be my two big foci for this afternoon's talk. First of all, let me talk about, in brief, Taiwan's role in the region and its impact on these countries in the region as well. In the past, for the past few years before 2008, Taiwan seems to play as sort of spoiler or troublemakers sometimes in the region in order to confront mainland China diplomatically or politically. And that policy has been changed or replaced by President Ma's flexible diplomacy, stressing Taiwan's goodwill by calling for a diplomatic truce with mainland China, in the hope that Taiwan's proactive attitude towards cross-Taiwan relations reconciliation will bring peace dividends to the region of the Asia-Pacific. I have to admit that mechanism dealing with such reconciliation have not been institutionalized. But in general, these developments in cross-Taiwan relations, cross-Taiwan trade relations, with less confrontational nature has encouraged regional actors and countries, in particular, to approach Taiwan with more non-political initiatives that can benefit their own people. And in the realm of non-traditional security cooperation between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, a lot of measures have been conducted, such as nuclear security cooperation, medical and health cooperation, as well as joint crime fighting and judiciary mutual cooperation agreements. I think these successful experiences derived from these fields of cooperation can be models for the region to promote human security with mainland China in the future. And in the traditional security realm, I think Taiwan has expressed its position many times under the leadership of President Ma, that Taiwan will never change its policy of peaceful dispute settlement, and Taiwan will not accept any offer provided by mainland China that will damage the interest of Taiwan people and the stability of the region in the Asia-Pacific, when cross-strait relations are making some progress after May 2008. And also, President Ma has reiterated that Taiwan endorses bilateral and multilateral arrangements in the Asia-Pacific, including U.S.-Japan Security Alliance, in the hope that the overall regional situation in the Asia-Pacific can be beneficial to all people in these countries. So let me move on to the section talking about how South Korea should view Taiwan in its relations with mainland China. As some of the people may have argued that the nature of South Korea-Taiwan relations should be competitive. But I think competition between the two countries is unavoidable, but we should turn this competition into sort of a mixture of competition and cooperation. That's why, from a scholar's angle, I would like to talk about some of the points that can bring both South Korea and Taiwan closer in order to cope with regional difficulties or challenges in the near future. First of all, I would like to say that South Korea can take advantage of Taiwanese businesses, especially the mid and small enterprises, to work on mainland China's market. This theory has been proved correct by a Japanese commercial bank, Mizuho Bank, This bank released a research paper saying that, let me quote it, there has been a sharp increase of Japanese companies investing in mainland China through joint ventures with Taiwanese companies and its own subsidiaries in Taiwan. That is, with the help of Taiwan's companies, can Japanese enterprises have a higher survival rate in doing business or investing in mainland China? So I think South Korea should consider Taiwan, whose people share a lot of Chinese characteristics in many ways, as a forwarding base to boost South Korea's economic ties and profits both in mainland China and Taiwan. Despite people would argue that South Korea and Taiwan are competitive in economic nature and their economic structures are not that complementary, but I think it is still possible to come up with some ways to draw cooperation between the two countries, especially South Korea's multinational corporations and Taiwan's mid and small enterprises to work on mainland Chinese market. And the second point I would like to make is that actually South Korea can cooperate with Taiwan in effective control over economic dependence on mainland China. The statistics showed that South Korea's total exports to mainland China accounted for about 24% of South Korea's annual export amount in 2001. And the amount is even higher in Taiwan. I think in Taiwan, the export amount from Taiwan to mainland China accounted for about 43% of Taiwan's total exports annually last year. So I think both countries are really in the need to sit down to come up with some effective solution to have effective control over economic dependence on mainland China. Why I say so? Not only because high economic dependence may result in great fragility in both economic and political terms once relations between trading partners turn sour, but also there are still some territorial disputes between South Korea and mainland China, which haven't loomed large. So I think it's high time for South Korea to think about a cooperative way with Taiwan so that the two countries can effectively control their economic dependence on mainland China. And also, I think these effective control measures would avoid setbacks coming possibly from mainland China's slowdown in its domestic economic growth. So, how both South Korea and Taiwan can jointly map a strategy of risk aversion by enhancing economic ties and cooperation with each other appears indispensable at present. And my last point I'm going to make is that actually South Korea can help Taiwan act as a showcase of peaceful settlement of disputes with mainland China. For all parties concerned, I think it's very important to keep a stable Taiwan Strait so that economic prosperity in the region will not be damaged. And also, by asking mainland China to engage peacefully with countries in territorial disputes, I think mainland China will learn some lessons how this current international community deals with territorial disputes in a legal or reasonable, civilized way. It's my personal belief that leaders in Beijing must have sensed the unwanted consequences on their peaceful reunification with Taiwan whenever using force to solve territorial disputes with Beijing's neighboring countries emerges as a policy option. That is, whenever Beijing is trying to use force against other countries in dispute, I think that will have a negative setback impact on its aim to unify Taiwan. So I think while improving its overall relations with mainland China rapidly, territorial disputes with mainland China are still potential threats to such relations from the South Korean perspective. Therefore, I argue that South Korea needs to act as a supportive third party to encourage constructive and fact-based dialogues between Taipei and Beijing, because these constructive and fact-based dialogues will more or less help shape a more self-restrained and less aggressive behavior of mainland China towards the other parties in a dispute. And Taiwan will definitely help in that sense. So I think Taiwan is definitely not a key player in Seoul-Beijing relations. That's for sure. However, with this current administration's foreign and mainland policies in Taiwan, Taiwan will not become an obstacle to the development of such relations as well. What Taiwan is now undertaking on the basis of its rapprochement policies towards mainland China, and whatever experience Taiwan has gained in engaging mainland China, can certainly make a concrete contribution to the development of Seoul-Beijing relations. With the current pace in cross-Taiwan Strait relations, I believe it's very possible that both Seoul-Beijing ties and Seoul-Taipei ties can become two sets of parallel relations that won't conflict with each other. And even the Seoul-Beijing ties with more understandings of Beijing can act as a starting point for a win-win-win situation in the Asia-Pacific. I think I just stop here and look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. My name is Kim Young-hyun, professor of North Korean Studies at Dongguk University. I am currently a visiting scholar at the U.S.-Korea Research Institute at Johns Hopkins University's SICE program. I came to the United States on March 4th, and this is my first presentation in the U.S. Thank you for this opportunity. I apologize for the inconvenience because I cannot present in English today. Let me begin. My topic today is China's role within and influence on North-South Korean relations. I would like to present you with 4 points. The first is an analysis of the current status of Korea-China relations. The second point is on China's strategic understanding of North Korea and its current level of influence. The third point is on the degree of stability in North Korea under the Kim Jong-un regime. The last point is on the prospects of North Korea's influence on South Korea-China relations. I will talk to you today about these 4 points. First, let's take a look at the current status of South Korea-China relations. In the past 20 years, South Korea and China's relationship has grown rapidly in terms of economic cooperation, to the degree that 1/3 of Korea's exports are consumed by the Chinese market. A Korea-China free trade agreement is currently being discussed, and if it is implemented, there will be a new level of economic cooperation between the two countries. The problem in the relationship lies in the areas of military and foreign policy, in contrast to the cooperation in economic relations. There have been no significant developments in military and foreign relations. There are 2 reasons behind this phenomenon. The big element is, of course, North Korea. The existence of North Korea itself functions as an impediment to the development of military and foreign relations between South Korea and China. In other words, there are some conflicts of interest for China in developing China-South Korea relations while maintaining China-North Korea relations. These issues exacerbate tensions between China and South Korea.
한중 간의 미묘한 어려움들을 지금 가중시키고 있고 결국 그것이 한중 관계에도 영향을 주고 있다. 그렇게 봐야 될 것 같습니다. 또 하나는
Another important element is the U.S.-China relationship. While the relationship between the two countries is characterized by cooperation, there are still delicate considerations that remain divisive.
뭔가 영향을 주고 있다. 다시 말씀드리면 미국이 북한에 대해서
In other words, there are differences between the United States' position towards North Korea and towards China, and China's position on North Korea also influences South Korea-China relations.
영향을 주고 있는 이것이 현재의 모습인가 아닌가 하는 판단입니다. 이 이야기를 좀 더 이제 구체적으로 좀 이야기를 하고 싶은데요. 그 구체적인 이야기 중에서
To be more detailed, I would like to talk about one of the fundamental issues. We need to examine China's strategic interests in North Korea. I think this part is very crucial. I believe China's strategic interests in North Korea are to maintain positive relations as well as to influence North Korea. China does not want the U.S. to have direct influence on North Korea.
중국이 김정은 체제에 대해서 갖고 있는 그런 전략적 이해다라고 판단이 됩니다.
China will not accept direct U.S. influence in the vicinity of the Yalu and Tumen rivers.
사이에 두고 미국과 직접 중국이 국경을 맞대거나 국경을 맞댄다는 의미는 좀 다른 차원이겠습니다만 미국의 영향력이 압록강, 두만강까지 끼치는 상태에서 중국이 직접적으로 그런 대면할 수 있는 이런 관계를 중국은 절대 원치 않는다라고 하는 것이 중국의 기본 입장인 것 같습니다. 물론
Of course, China does not express this explicitly,
그런 이야기를 하지는 않지만 그러나
but it views North Korea as strategically significant based on the fact that it is a buffer, as it was during the Cold War period.
완충지대의 의미를 두고 있다라고 봐야 될 것 같습니다. 그것은
China has not officially acknowledged it, but China perceives that it is encircled by the United States.
상당 부분 미국에 의해서 중국이 포위되었다라고 하는 입장이 중국의 입장인 것 같은데요. 거기에서 현재까지 북한이라고 하는 지역이 갖고 있는
China's proximity to North Korea compounds its strategic interest.
북한에 대한 입장 또는 북한에 대해서 갖고 있는 전략적 이해는 여전히 크다 이렇게 봐야 될 것 같습니다.
Therefore, even if the relationship between North Korea and the U.S. is restored, China would not want to upset the long-standing, positive relationship cultivated between China and North Korea. I believe this position will be maintained by the fifth-generation Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, who will ascend to power in October.
거기에 반해서 이제 미국이 갖고 있는 지금 중국의 북한에 대한 전략적 이해에 견주어서 미국이 갖고 있는 전략적 이해는
compared to China's leverage in North Korea, the U.S.'s leverage is not as strong.
그만큼은 아니다라고 보고 있습니다. 또 중국의 대북 정책을 중국이 갖고
Also, the U.S. does not have the advantage that China has over North Korea as a result of economic ties and other forms of influence.
북한에 대해서 만들기 쉽지 않다라고 하는 부분입니다.
The U.S. has a wide range of interests in the world and thus is unable to devote its full attention to North Korea alone.
미국이 중국이 갖고 있는 그런 능력보다는 더 거기에 쏟아부을 수 없다라고 하는 점에서도
In this sense, China has much stronger leverage in North Korea.
와 관련된 부분에서 어느 정도 인정하고 거기에 어느 정도 그것을 인정하는 가운데서
The U.S. needs to admit this and focus on a limited range of policy issues.
이런 차원으로 접근할 수밖에 없는 것이 현실이지 않느냐 하는 그런 판단입니다.
I can elaborate on this more if there are additional questions later.
한중 관계에 미치는 북한의 영향과 관련된 부분에서 세 번째 좀 드리고 싶은 말씀은 북한 김정은 체제가
The third point I want to discuss is the degree of instability of the Kim Jong-un regime, because this issue has tremendous influence on South Korea-China relations, not only within the context of the Korean Peninsula, but also within greater Northeast Asia. To briefly mention the Kim Jong-un regime's power structure, it has rapidly established a rigid, centralized structure of political authority. By rapidly forming this system, they are trying to compensate for Kim Jong-un's weaknesses, such as his young age and lack of experience. I know there have been many discussions regarding the Kim Jong-un regime's power structure. With Kim Jong-un at the apex, leaders from different policy areas support Kim Jong-un through tightly integrated vertical lines of authority. For example, family members such as Jong Song-taek and Kim Kyung-hee play an important role, as well as Chae Yong-hye and Lee Yong-ho. This centralized establishment is the power structure of North Korea. We can say that this structure was established not by Kim Jong-un, but by the deceased Kim Jong-il. The current leadership structure was established at the Third Convention of the Korean Workers' Party. One important thing to mention regarding stability under the Kim Jong-un regime are the enabling conditions. Enabling conditions refer to a few elements that enable the Kim Jong-un regime to function. There are 4 or 5 elements. I have already mentioned a few, but the first element is China. Chinese acknowledgement of the Kim Jong-un regime is important. Even though the Chinese acknowledgement of the Kim Jong-un regime is well recognized externally, I believe there are different perspectives within the Chinese leadership. It is in China's interest to continue developing a mutually beneficial relationship with North Korea, although some people in the Chinese leadership will continue observing North Korea with caution. In October, after the Xi Jinping regime takes office, Kim Jong-un will visit China. This visit has the symbolic meaning that China officially acknowledges the Kim Jong-un regime. The second element is the U.S. It is important how the U.S. views the Kim Jong-un regime. Currently, the U.S. is studying the Kim Jong-un regime from various perspectives. It seems as if the U.S. officially acknowledges the Kim Jong-un regime publicly, but there are various analytical studies going on internally. As an essential party in resolving nuclear issues, normalizing U.S.-North Korea relations, and establishing a peace treaty to officially end the Korean War, I believe the U.S. is putting a lot of thought into developing relationships with North Korea. South Korea is similar. The North-South relationship has worsened since the Lee Myung-bak administration took office. How the next South Korean administration views North Korea will be crucial to the stability of the Kim Jong-un regime. The approach of the victor in the December South Korean presidential elections will also influence regime stability in the north. Also, how the elites of North Korea balance power among themselves while supporting the Kim Jong-un regime is important.
얼마만큼 해내가면서 김정은 체제를 떠받들 수 있느냐라고 하는 부분들도 대단히 중요하다고 봅니다. 이 문제는 뭐 상당히 많은 이야기를 할 수가 있습니다.
I will not elaborate extensively on this matter.
말씀드리는 걸 대신하겠습니다. 또 하나는
The final element has to do with the livelihood of North Korean citizens.
경제적인 상황 자체가 상당히 좋지 않은 지금의 상황에서 이것이 어느 정도 개선의
The speed of economic recovery in the north will have a significant effect on the regime's stability.
안정성과 관련돼서 매우 중요한 그 의미를 담고 있다고 봅니다. 물론 북한의 중동과 같은 자스민 혁명이랄지
Of course, the chance that an event such as the Arab Spring in the Middle East happening in North Korea is slim to none.
불가능하거나 저는 없다라고 봅니다. 그러니까 중국의 특별한 변화, 중국의 아래로부터의 어떤 여러 가지 변화들이 보이지 않는
Factors such as China and the lack of free communication within North Korea do not allow for such forms of revolution.
그런 그 소통이 이루어지기 어려운 사회에서 쉽지 않다고 봅니다만 어쨌든 그럼에도 불구하고
But if people's livelihood does not improve, regime stability cannot be fully achieved.
그런 요소들이 그 만들어지지 않는다라면 김정은 체제는 그 안정성을 완전히 확보했다라고 보기는 어렵다고 봅니다.
Only when the previously mentioned 5 elements are fulfilled will the Kim Jong-un regime be able to enjoy stability. Finally, I will talk about prospects for North Korea's influence on Korea-China relations. Regarding North Korea-China relations, I would like to mention a couple of things.
아까도 좀 말씀을 드린 부분입니다만 북한 체제가 상대적으로 약화되는
In the past few years, there are emerging symptoms of North Korea's systemic weakness.
왔던 게 사실입니다. 김일성 주석의 사망 이후부터 뭐
We can say that this has been happening since the death of Kim Il-sung.
이런 과정에서 중국의 역할 또는 중국의 입장 자체가 보다 커지고 있고 중국의 지도부 입장에서
During this process, the role of China is growing, and the Chinese leaders are willing to systematically influence North Korea.
구조화시키겠다라고 하는 그런 의지가 저는 분명히 엿보인다라고 봅니다. 그것이 중국의 국익에 부합할 수 있다라고 중국 보는 것 같고요. 그 과정에서
By using North Korea's economic dependence on China as a leverage, China is trying to compound its influence in North Korea.
이 파워를 보다 강하게 행사하려고 하고 있다라고 봐야 될 것 같습니다. 북한 역시 지금의 상황 속에서
North Korea is also accepting Chinese influence to some degree, but not because it wants to.
북한이 중국과의 어떤 관계를 경제적 부분에서
Obviously, North Korea does not see this situation as ideal, but it has no other choice.
적극적이고 긍정적으로 바라보는 측면은 분명히 없다고.
With this background in mind, we have to look at North Korea's role in Korea-China relations.
이제 그러한 상황들을 받아들일 수밖에 없는 이런 상황인 것 같고요. 이런 조건에서 제가 볼 때는 이 한중 관계
I already told you that North Korea is a limiting factor in the development of South Korea-China relations.
역시 그 크게 제약 요인으로 작용할 수밖에 없다라는 부분을 아까 말씀을 드렸고요.
I believe the South Korea-China relationship is heavily contingent on North Korea-China relations.
영향을 받는 것 같습니다. 다시 말씀드리면 북중 관계가 현재와 같은 속도로 또는 현재와 같은 내용들로 계속 간다거나 보다 심화된다라면
In other words, if North Korea maintains its current relationship with China in economic terms, factors that can influence South Korea-China relations are very limited.
경제 부분에서 한중 경제 협력이 심화된다면 북중 관계와 관련된 부분에서도 한국의 영향력이 커질 수 있는 것이고 또
Some people say that if the economic ties between South Korea and China deepen, South Korea can better influence North Korea's China relations.
중국에 의해서 북한이 뭔가 변화되는 이런 모습을 보이면 한국에도 좋은 것 아니냐 이런 이야기를 하기도 합니다만 그러나 제가 볼 때는
But if China is able to further influence North Korea, it will be better for South Korea as well.
그 경제적인 관계가 발전한다고 해서
However, in my opinion, those people overlook the special relationship between North Korea and China. Despite the development of an economic relationship, it does not necessarily follow that military and diplomatic relations between China and South Korea will also develop. The fundamental relationship between China and South Korea may be very difficult because of North Korea. One other thing is the lack of breakthrough on the nuclear issues.
북한이 앞으로 우리 흔히 나쁜 행동이라는 표현을 씁니다만 그런 3차 핵실험이랄지 또는 3차
The continuing so-called bad behavior of North Korea, including a potential third nuclear test and future rocket tests, will increase the stress on U.S.-China and South Korea-China relations.
한미 간 견해차라기보다 한미와 중국 간에 또는 한국과 중국 간의
If North Korea continues its actions, the differences in opinion between South Korea and the U.S. vis-à-vis China will introduce tension on South Korea-China relations.
풀어가는 데 있어서 제가 볼 때는 가장 중요한 부분은 한미 간의 협력 구도는 분명히 한국이 갖고 있는 게 사실이고 그래서 한미 동맹이라는 표현을 우리가 쓰고 있습니다만 앞으로도 지속적으로 풀어야 될 내용이고 지속적으로 중요한 과제라는 생각이 듭니다. 그러면서도
While the U.S.-South Korea alliance is strong, improving South Korea-China relations is the key to resolving North Korean issues.
북한 문제를 어떤 식으로 한국과 중국이 머리를 맞대고 풀어가느냐 또는
Also, forming a consensus between South Korea, China, and the U.S. regarding North Korea and continuing the diplomatic dialogue in the region is crucial.
북한 문제에 대한 그런 컨센서스가 한중 간에 또는 한미중 간에 보다 아주 밀접하게 그리고 내용을 갖고 지속적 관점에서 이루어질 필요가 있다라는 말씀을 드리면서
With this, I conclude my presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Professor Kim, Dr. Wong, and your very fine presentations. I was given two tasks, one to be a moderator, one to be a commentator. I want to say I was much more enthusiastic about the former because I was looking forward to being educated and hearing these gentlemen and learning from them. A little less enthusiastic about the commenting because I wonder how much value added I can be to the comments we've already heard, but I will do my best to meet my assignment. I want to do three things, just comment and very briefly on the two presentations that were made. Number two, weave in some of the U.S. perspective as I see it on these issues, because we're going to try to broaden this a bit to be a discussion about a triangular relationship, China, Korea, and the United States. So the U.S. perspective should be woven in. And then number three, maybe based on some of the comments I make, lay out some initial questions that you might be able to address before we open the floor. So first, with respect to comments I might make, and I'll start in the order that the presentations were given on, and so therefore start with Taiwan. I thought of course the presentation was excellent. There were some insights there with respect to how things may unfold and are potentially managed in the Taiwan ROK relationship. And I think if I could describe it as if things are on the same trajectory in the cross-strait relationship, then what Taiwan is looking at is essentially a challenge of managing potential economic tensions. And are the ROK-Taiwan relations going to be seen primarily as competitive, or could they be more complementary, cooperative in the economic sphere? I just might add to that, that's, in a sense, the easy scenario to look at if the cross-strait relationship remains on the current trajectory. And I certainly understand why you'd make the presentation in that fashion, because President Ma's policies, along with his counterparts across the strait, have been very successful in terms of the rapprochement and rebuilding of cross-strait ties. But there could be hiccups in there. The first set of hiccups could be related to the current trajectory of cross-strait relations continues, but there's some dashed expectations on Taiwan's part in terms of what is accomplished outside the cross-strait relationship in the region and in some of these important relationships like the Taiwan-Korea relationship. In other words, what has been described in Taiwan as an inside-out strategy, fix the cross-strait relationship so that you can improve relations throughout the region, pursue perhaps trade liberalization bilaterally with other countries, perhaps greater participation in multilateral organizations, global or regional. I would submit that's still a largely untested proposition. The cross-strait relationship has, in fact, improved a great deal, but we have FTA talks underway between Taiwan and Singapore, Taiwan and New Zealand, but these are not concluded. And of course, the bigger question, what about TPP for Taiwan at some point? So if Taiwan and the PRC maintain this trajectory, there's still that sort of untested question of how this inside-out strategy will work. How successfully can Taiwan broaden out to other bilateral, regional, global institutions? And I think this is this is embedded in the question about Taiwan-Korean relations going forward. But that said, it's not entirely clear that the current trajectory will continue, and I don't want to be a pessimist, and I don't want to sound cynical. But I think too often we only talk about the trajectory being disrupted by events in Taiwan. For example, a return to power of the opposition party and how profoundly uncomfortable that might make government leaders in Beijing. But I think those dynamics could change relatively soon, depending on this interactive cross-strait dynamic, which is really based on how each respective domestic political situations unfold. And let me give a scenario. There is a possibility that at some point leaders in Beijing, sensing a lame duck president in Taipei, sensing a closing window because of looming elections, may press harder for cross-strait discussions to go outside the economic sphere and go into the political sphere and the security sphere. These are much more difficult discussions and much more controversial inside Taiwan. And so there could be some disruption to this trajectory, which then could be felt throughout the region. If the trajectory is upset, I think that always presents uncomfortable choices for a lot of people. Certainly does for the United States. Because oftentimes Taiwan is seen not only as an important relationship in its own right, but as a subset of managing U.S.-China relations, and that's certainly true of every other country in the region, very much to include Korea. So if the trajectory is not smooth and not on the present course, then there could be some challenges in these various relationships. So again, I'm not trying to sound cynical or pessimistic, but it's something to think about and something that I think your presentation didn't get much into. So perhaps a comment on that and how you might see difficulties in the cross-strait relationship and how that could impact what you described as the essential challenges in the U.S.-ROK relationship. On the presentation by Professor Kim on Korea, I certainly don't have the expertise and wouldn't want to challenge any of his insightful comments on Korea-China relations, but I might speak briefly on the issue of North Korea and how that affects U.S.-China relations and the U.S.-ROK relationship. I think, first of all, how it affects U.S.-China relations. I think for a long time we've been guilty in the United States of overstating the degree to which we share common interests with China on the Korean Peninsula and particularly the challenges associated with North Korea. I'm not alone in this. There are plenty of people who fall into this category, but I think by and large our governments, whether they've been Republican or Democrat, have drifted back towards a construct where we operate from a feeling of shared interests And that has actually, that's consequential in terms of how you fashion your approach to Beijing when you're sitting in Washington with respect to the Korean Peninsula. I think we have common aversions. I think in a perfect world it would be a nuclear-free peninsula for all parties, to include China. I think nobody wants instability or hard landings or certainly conflict. But I think those are common aversions as opposed to common interests. And the distinction is really, it becomes consequential when you talk about, so what do we do with this as a matter of policy and as a matter of decision making, given our respective views. And I think the United States and China often start stepping out in different directions because they're not completely shared interests, and certainly the prioritization is different. I think the Chinese have long valued stability, as Professor Kim's presentation very correctly noted. I think they think about things like potential refugee problems if there was instability. I think they think about losing that buffer in the event of a hard landing where Seoul and Washington and that alliance had some sort of an upper hand in the post-conflict situation. So I think the priorities are different, and it creates a different set of interests, which I think that therefore the question going forward is, do we embrace a more realistic notion of what our respective interests are and operate from, I think, a base that is closer to objective reality, or do we drift back towards trying to have a partnership that's hand in glove that I think will ultimately fail, because again, I think it's an overstatement of the degree to which we share the interests. There's certainly several subplots to this. Some people talk about changing views in China. Yes, it's true that they value these things and have to date prioritized in a certain way, but are their attitudes towards North Korea changing? Would incidents such as the recent kidnappings, would that be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they realize that this alliance is more of an albatross than it is a helpful a modality to maintain the buffer? These are questions that we can't answer with great certainty, but we do know when China has been tested in the very recent past, whether that's the sinking of the Chonan or the shelling of the island, China has chosen to back its traditional ally at the expense of ROK-China relations, certainly at the expense of U.S.-China relations. So to date, whether or not there's debate going on in China, whether or not there's different views being represented, to date they've chosen to stick with their core principles that have been true up to this point and have not altered the policies in any meaningful way. With respect to U.S.-ROK relations, it's always struck me that the issue of the DPRK and the various challenges can cut in a couple of different directions simultaneously. In a way, it's so fundamental to the alliance, and having that threat, that uncertainty. I mean, alliances mostly form, historically they form because there's a common threat and a view that a deterrent capability is needed, as well as a capability for the worst case scenarios and the worst contingencies. But in another way, it's sort of trapped the alliance in a very myopic kind of view of things, that we're an alliance that exists because of North Korea and the challenges that are found on the peninsula, and has been a bit of an inhibitor to having a more regional alliance or a global alliance. Now, whether or not both alliance partners will buy into that eventually, there could be, a discussion there. But I know from the U.S. perspective, this kind of pivot over the long term is something that is desired. I mean, we do see the U.S.-ROK alliance as a global alliance in some important ways. Certainly, when we face contingencies like in Iraq, it's not lost on people that the ROK had the third largest contribution of troops after the U.S. and the U.K. At one juncture. But again, is this problem and challenge of the DPRK, is this ultimately an inhibitor to moving in the direction of a more regional and global-oriented alliance? Because, of course, everybody has resource constraints. Everybody is dealing with perhaps even more austerity when it comes to the allocation of those resources. Is there such a near-term challenge that we can't fully make that pivot for the alliance. And so maybe that's a question as well, if you share this view, or if you think the alliance can be transformed while we're dealing with the immediate and near-term threat from the north. I think you started to talk about the upcoming elections in Seoul. That'll of course be of great interest to people here in Washington. I think, irrespective of how President Lee may be viewed back in Korea, he's certainly viewed here as being a very strong support of the alliance. And although we don't know which candidate will prevail at this point in a close election, I think there's a sense that perhaps we're having it about as good as we can have it. For a lot of Americans, of course, the alliance started in 1950, and the U.S.-Korea relationship started in 1950, and we have a very ahistorical perspective on things. Of course, most of our friends in Korea are quick to remind us the relationship goes back a lot further and is far more complicated than just the United States coming in to save the day. All of those issues will probably play out in the course of the election, but more importantly after the election, in fashioning the approach to the United States. Those are the complexities that the next president will have to deal with. So perhaps a little more comment on that in terms of any potential changes to what you've presented, Professor Kim, based on the election outcomes. Of course, we're having an election in the United States as well. There may be some impact there, but I think for the most part, our Asia policy has been remarkably bipartisan, remarkably consistent and stable, whether it's been Republican or Democrat over the years. So I think probably that is the safest and best guess, is continued stability. So I think just to kind of wrap up on the commentating and bringing in U.S. perspective, pulling the thread on some of these trajectories a little bit, if we see a change in the cross-strait dynamic, how that could impact things, and changes in whether it's political changes with elections or whether it's other external changes, what that might mean for the U.S.-ROK alliance in the future. I'd be interested in hearing you address. I did want to make one other comment. Professor Kim spoke about everyone's interest in stability on the Korean Peninsula, stability in North Korea, and that China has the most important cards to play with respect to sustaining stability over time. But I might also add, and maybe invite your comment, there are stability scenarios that maybe over the long term, while stable, aren't necessarily in our long-term interest. If the Kim dynasty, monarchy, whatever is the appropriate term of art here, remains in power, if Chinese influence continues to grow steadily over time, if China's involvement in the economy continues to grow, if China's connections to the military, the party, and so forth continue to evolve and develop, there is a scenario that is very stable. But in essence, North Korea gets pulled closer and closer and further into the Chinese orbit, even more so than it is today, to a point where I wonder if Seoul's calculus starts to change a little bit, if that value placed on stability, if that can be impacted over and by concerns of China's growing influence. So why don't I stop there? And I don't know if you want to make immediate comment based on my comments, and then open the floor.
Just, I apologize for one quick introduction. I understand that it was a little difficult to hear the simultaneous interpretation. So while Dr. Huang responds for Dr. Kim's response for the second part, we'll bring out the interpreter out so that you can hear better. So.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Randy, for your very insightful comments. Your question is actually of great importance for people to predict the future of cross-Taiwan Strait relations and its impact on East Asia. In general, I think my response would be that Taiwan trying to confront mainland China without justified reasons and without wide support isn't welcome and isn't helpful. So how can we, I mean all parties concerned in the region, help keep the trajectory right? I think, I'm speaking on this not from the perspective of the current ruling party of Taiwan, but from the perspective of Taiwan, Republic of China as an independent sovereign country and as responsible stakeholder in the region. I think the most important thing for all parties concerned is to help Taiwan gain some confidence in dealing with mainland China. How can people be of help? For example, Taiwan is eager to participate in a lot of regional events activities to expand its international room space and to help its NGOs participate in more international NGO programs. Those are something that can bring Taiwan people and government more confidence in the international arena. And not to mention, U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, moderate sale to Taiwan, would help Taiwan establish its confidence to deal with mainland China. So I think there are a lot of ways to help the trajectory right under the leadership of President Ma Ying-jeou in Taiwan. But actually not only today, but for the past few months, I think at least, my statements or arguments made in different occasions would always based on during the President Ma's presidency. Because, as you said, there are a lot of dynamics, not only in the Taiwan Strait, but also inside Taiwan. So I cannot control those factors. And I have to admit that some factors like the regime change in Taiwan would definitely impact regional stability in East Asia in a way. I don't know in a good way or a bad way, but it will impact East Asia regional stability in a way. So, again, I think the questions got no answer. But I think all we can do is try to help Taiwan robust so that it can survive in the region. And as I said, it can serve as a starting point or a foundation to whatever you said, educate or civilize or interact positively with mainland China. And hopefully mainland China can learn some lessons from its interactions with Taiwan and then apply those lessons to mainland China's future interactions with other parties in disputes.
토론은 잘 들었습니다. 한두 가지 내용을 제외하고는 저도 동의하는 말씀들을 많이 해주셔서 그 문제에 동의하는 부분들은 빼고 저하고 조금 이견이 있는 그런 부분을 중심으로 해서 좀 간단하게 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
Administratively, we had some problems with the interpreting equipment, so we'll be consecutive from here on for Korean to English. And I will start here. Thank you very much for various comments and great presentation. I do agree with many of what's been said in this room. However, there are some points where I differ. So I think it would be best if I focus on the areas where I differ in opinion.
그 토론 중에 이제 이런 말씀이 있었습니다. 그 한반도의 비핵화와 관련된 부분에 있어서 공통의 목적은 같지만 공통의 국익은 좀 다른 것 같다라는 말씀을 하신 것 같은데요. 제가 볼 때는 공통의 목적과 공통의 국익은 저는 뭐 같다라고 생각합니다.
I think it was pointed out earlier that when it comes to the nuclear issues for the Korean Peninsula, that all the parties have the same goal of non-nuclear peninsula. However, it was also mentioned that the national interests of these various parties are different in this regard.
중국 입장에서도 제가 볼 때는 한반도 비핵화가 대단히 중요하다라고 보고 있는데요. 그것은 만약에 북한이 핵을 완전하게 보유하는 그런 국가가 됐을 경우에 동북아시아에서의 핵 도미노 현상, 일본 대만, 한국의 핵 보유랄지 뭐 이런 부분들의 가능성에 대해서 중국은 상당 부분 그 전략적 이해와 관련된 부분에서 그것은 도저히 받아들일 수 없다. 특히 대만의 핵 보유라고 하는 것은 상상할 수 없다라고 하는 것이 중국의 입장이라고 봅니다.
Now, when it comes to the nuclear possession by North Korea, I think China's interest is non-nuclear North Korea. That's because if China were to condone and also allow North Korea to have a nuclear and to call North Korea a nuclear state, this could create a domino effect where there would be other countries wanting to have a nuclear possession, and China would be unable to stop these other countries from having them. For example, we have Japan and South Korea that may want a nuclear possession as well, and also Taiwan. Now, should Taiwan want a nuclear possession, this is something that is definitely a no-no for China. China would not want that to happen, but this would be opening the door for Taiwan to have nuclear warhead if China were to allow North Korea to have a nuclear possession.
는 한반도 비핵화 문제, 특히 북핵 문제에 대한 접근법에 있어서 저는 한국과 미국과 중국의 공통적 목적, 공통적 국익은 같다라고 보는데 방식의 차이인 것 같습니다. 특히 중국이 갖고 있는 그 북한 문제에 대한 접근법, 북핵 문제에 대한 접근법과 미국, 한국이 갖고 있는 접근법의 그 차이가 발생하는 이 문제가 또 북핵 문제를 풀어가는 데 있어서 삼국의 어떤 공통의 그런 입장이 나오는 것을 어렵게 만드는 그런 요인이지 않느냐 하는 생각입니다.
So I believe when it comes to the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula, the national interests of the three countries, South Korea, China, and the U.S., do come together and they meet at the same point. However, the approach towards non-nuclear North Korea is different. That's where the difference is, and that's where the conciliation needs to come in together, and that's where the cooperation needs to be played together.
한미의 입장이 그 중요한 부분이기도 하지만 중국이 갖고 있는 북핵 문제에 대한 접근법도 상당 부분 그 경청해야 될 부분들이 있다. 특히 북한을 몰아붙이는 또는 북한을 압박하는 쪽에 포인트를 두면서 문제를 풀어간다라고 하는 것은 현실적으로 그것의 그 성공 가능성이 낮은 것이 또 현실인 것 같습니다.
So we have, on the one hand, the South Korea-U.S. approach to North Korean problem, and then we have, on the other hand, the Chinese approach. And there are certain things, actually, that South Korea and the U.S. could learn from China when it comes to its approach towards North Korea's denuclearization. Because I honestly believe hardline only type of approach towards North Korea is not effective and it is not realistic. We do need to learn and watch from China.
북한이 핵을 포기해야만 관계 개선을 할 수 있다. 또는 북한의 선 핵 포기를 강조하는 것은 뭐 그것은 그 우리의 어떤 그런 wishful thinking이라고 하는 차원에서는 가능한 이야기지만 현실적으로 북한의 선 핵 포기를 요구하고 그 이후에 뭔가 그 북한에 대한 정책을 바꾸겠다라고 하는 부분은 현실적으로 존재하는 북한의 입장 또는 북한 문제를 보는 데 있어서 외교적으로 그것은 최선의 방법은 현재는 아닌 것 같습니다.
So for South Korea and the U.S. to stress that the nuclear must be given up first before any talks continued, that's actually a wishful thinking. It sounds good, it looks good, but it's not realistic. We are unable to change the policies of North Korea by demanding that they change their stance first. It's not very diplomatic.
볼 때는 뭐 그 어려운 이야기일 수 있습니다만 한미 간의 입장과 중국이 갖고 있는 입장의 그 절충점들을 찾아내는 것들이 필요하다. 그것이 만들어지지 않는다면 북핵 문제를 풀어갈 수 있는 그런 근본적인 외부의 압박, 설득의 그 방식들은 늘 성공하기 어렵다라고 봅니다. 특히 중국이 그 한미의 입장과 그 방식에 있어서 그 차이를 지속적으로 드러낼 경우에는 북핵 문제를 풀어간다는 것은 사실 외교적 차원에서는 거의 불가능한 상황 아닌가. 그 중국이 북한과의 관계를 또는 북한이 중국과의 관계를 풀어가는 이런 차원에서 본다라면 사실 그 한미의 입장만으로 그 중국의 입장과의 차이를 극복하지 못하는 한 그것은 현실적으로 북핵 문제를 풀기는 어렵다라는 생각입니다.
So there has to be some sort of compromise reached between Chinese approach and the South Korean U.S. approach, because if we were to continue on the current path where the two approaches run parallel to one another and never meet, I don't think we would be able to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue. We need to watch and learn from China, and China also has to find a way to compromise with South Korea and the U.S. When it comes to North Korean issues. And that's the only realistic and diplomatic way that we will be able to have some sort of a resolution. Otherwise, the status quo of the problem continues into the future.
핵심은 여전히 쉬운 문제는 아니지만 한미 중 간에 아까도 말씀드렸습니다만 그 북한 문제, 포괄적 북한 문제, 쫓겨는 핵 문제, 이 문제에 대한 컨센서스를 어떻게 조기에 확보해내느냐 하는 문제가 저는 앞으로 매우 중요한 과제다라고 봅니다.
So perhaps when it comes to the North Korean issue, there has to be a consensus among China, South Korea, and the U.S. And shall we say we have a nuclear problem, but that's actually a limited part of the problems that we're facing. There is a comprehensive part of North Korean issue that we need to deal with, and the three countries need to come together and reach a consensus that these issues must be dealt with.
그렇게 본다면 이제 한국과 미국, 중국 간에 물론 육자회담이라고 하는 틀이 존재하고 있습니다만 그러나 좀 더 한미 중이 충분한 정부 간 또는 1.5 트랙이랄지 이런 대화를 할 수 있는 그런 구조들을 그 공식 비공식 구조들을 최대한 그 확보를 할 필요가 있다라고 봅니다.
So we have six-party talks. I believe six-party talks is not good enough. I think we could do better actually having three parties come together: South Korea, U.S., and China. Shall we call it the 1.5 track? And be it official or unofficial, it does not matter. There has to be some sort of a forum amongst the three countries where a consensus could be reached on the North Korean issues.
짧게 좀 말씀을 드리면 이제 한미 관계와 한중 관계 간의 문제인 것 같습니다.
And I've spoken at length, and I apologize, but I do believe there is a latent problem because of the relationship that South Korea has with the U.S. and the relationship that South Korea pursues with China at this point.
한국의 학자들이랄지 한국의 전반적인 그 한반도 문제에 관심 있는 사람들의 생각은 전통적인 차원에서 한미 관계를 기본으로 하고 그것에 바탕하에서 한중 관계를 부차적으로 접근하는 이런 흐름이 있는 게 사실입니다. 그렇지만 제가 볼 때는 한미 관계의 그 한미 동맹의 지속적 발전과 더불어서 한중 협력 구도가 상당 부분 과거보다는 발전해야만 또 발전한 그런 과정이 있어야만 북한 문제를 풀어가는 데 있어서도 그렇고 전반적인 한국의 어떤 국익에 부합되는 이런 것들이 앞으로 더 중요하게 만들어질 수 있다. 이런 점에서 한중 협력도 상당 부분 과거에 비해서 상대적으로 발전해야 된다라고 보는 견해가 있습니다. 저는 후자 입장을 갖고 있습니다.
And what I'm about to say, I'm a little hesitant to say so. However, I think it's important to point out there are traditional views among Korean scholars that when it comes to Korea-China relationship, that this should be based on South Korea-U.S. alliance, which remains strong. So the bedrock of the relationship for China-South Korea is South Korean-U.S. alliance. However, there are other views, and one other view is such that there has to be an evolution in the relationship that South Korea has with China. And South Korea has to sincerely try and rethink its relationship with its allies. And it has to evolve. It has to develop further into the future. And there are different thoughts on these things. But as for me, I believe the latter is the better approach and more preferred approach, realistically speaking, for Korea into the future.
한미 동맹, 한미 관계를 등한시하자는 입장은 전혀 아니고 한미 동맹을 앞으로도 강화해야 된다. 그리고 한미 동맹이 충분히 기반하지 않는 속에서 한반도 문제를 풀어가기는 어렵다라고 하는 부분에 대해서는 저도 같은 입장을 갖고 있습니다.
But it's not to say that we should neglect the U.S.-Korea relationship. I believe the U.S.-Korea relationship should be reinforced at the same time, and that the Korea-China relationship should not be pursued outside of the U.S.-Korea relationship.
그렇지만 아까도 말씀드린 북한 문제랄지 또는 전체적으로 한국의 국가 이익이라고 하는 그런 중장기적인 관점에서 봤을 때는 역시 한국이 중국과의 협력 구도, 그다음 한미 동맹이라고 하는 그런 구도 속에서 한국이 뭔가 중간에서 어떤 국가 이익들을 만들어낼 수밖에 없는, 또 만들어내게 되는 이런 과정으로 갈 수밖에 없다. 뭐 이런 점에서 한국의 입장이랄지 한국 정부가 뭔가 한미 동맹에 기반하면서 한중 협력을 끌어내는 또는 한중 협력을 강화해내는 이런 쪽에 그런 그 외교적인 노력들을 기울여야 된다. 뭐 이런 흐름이 한국에서도 만들어지고 있는 흐름이기도 하고 저도 뭐 그런 부분들이 중장기적으로 한국에 있어서는 도움이 될 것이다라는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
Looking into the mid and long-term national interest of South Korea. It is important that there is some change in the South Korea-North Korea relations, and also a change in the South Korea-China relationship. And this would be for the national interest of South Korea. And it's not to say, again, that we should neglect the alliance that we have between South Korea and the U.S., but based on the alliance that we have currently, we should delve into the better enhanced relationship with China and perhaps even North Korea. And this is the current, the undercurrent that I see in Korea, and I'm one of those people, and I believe there has to be a change, and that the status quo at this point is not enough.
We can open the floor, Mike. There and
Mike Ponte on the Washington liaison to the Democratic Progressive Party. Dr. Wong, just maybe if I might correct the record a bit, you talked about less confrontational status now that President Ma is in place. You talked about nuclear security cooperation. If I'm not wrong, the Container Security Initiative has been part of, Taiwan has been part of that for some time now. The previous DPP administration signed on to that. If I'm not my memory serves me correctly, there was one interdiction of a green shipment during the Pennsylvania administration. Pennsylvania administration also has medical and health cooperation with the region and other issues as well. So I just want to make sure that the cooperation side of things was certainly there under the previous administration. Randy, I guess a question for you in terms of the security issues. I'm not clear whether there was any further conversation. That during previous administration in South Korea, there was some resistance to the possibility of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea being involved in any Taiwan contingency. I wonder if you could update
My recollection is those conversations were not very mature or advanced. I mean, so much of the conversations in the alliance with Seoul when I served were about the immediate pressing challenges of North Korea, but also, of course, that's when we were involved with Iraq and the Middle East, and there was a very significant Korean contribution there. The talks about Taiwan scenarios and contingencies, I don't think were particularly well advanced or formed. I'm willing to have that corrected by others in the room, and I won't look at anybody in particular, General Gregson. But I wouldn't say that I wouldn't characterize it the way you did. Is I guess what I'm saying. I don't think those conversations were fully formed. Is that fair?
I don't recall any such conversations either.
Sir?
I'd like to direct a couple of questions. I'd like to direct my questions to Professor Kim. 김 교수님, 앞으로 말이죠. 앞으로라고 한 1, 2년을 제가 상정을 해서 말씀드리는 건데, 북한의 대미 정책을 어떻게 전개돼 가려고 전망하고 계신지 좀 말씀해 주셨으면 좋겠고요. 두 번째 질문은 아까 슈라이바 의장께서도 논평에 좀 언급하셨고 김 교수도 약간 말씀을 하셨지만은 앞으로 12월 달에 있을 한국의 대통령 선거의 결과가 북미 관계 그러니까 한미 관계뿐만 아니라 예를 들면 특히 북미 관계에 어떤 영향을 끼칠 수가 있으리라고 상정하시는지 좀 말씀해 주셨으면 감사하겠습니다.
Yeah, there had been two questions directed at Professor Kim. The first question was, what are your thoughts on the North Korean policies and how would the North Korean policies change into the future, perhaps in 1 or 2 years? And then the second question had been the election results, the presidential election that will be held in Korea and also in the U.S., and how would these election results influence the policies that the U.S. and the Korea would have towards North Korea, and also what type of influence these new administrations coming in have on the status of North Korea and South Korean relationship on the Korean Peninsula.
두 가지 질문을 해주셨는데요. 우선 12월 대선과 관련된 부분을 좀 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 12월 대선, 한국 대선에 대한 관심이 높은데요. 제가 볼 때는 차기 정부는, 한국의 차기 정부는 이명박 정부보다는 남북관계랄지 한반도 문제에 있어서 조금은 대화 중심으로 조금은 포인트를 더 높이는 정부가 나올 것이라고 봅니다. 그것이 보수적인 정당이 집권을 하든 또는 뭔가 야당이 집권을 하든지 간에 현재 정부보다는 좀 더 전향적인 대화 중심의 정책을 펼칠 가능성이 있다라고 봅니다.
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first, we do have a presidential election that's coming up in December, and we do not know which administration or what kind of administration it will be. But one thing that we do know for a fact, or that we feel that it should be, is that the next administration would be different from MB Lee's administration when it comes to North Korea. There would be more push towards dialogue with North Korea. It does not matter if the next administration be a conservative one or a progressive one. I believe, and most people in South Korea believe, that the new administration will engage in more talks with North Korea.
한국 정부의 대북 정책이 북미 관계를 근본적으로 바꾸는 그런 것은 분명히 아닙니다. 다시 말씀드리면 북미 관계와 남북 관계 또는 한국의 정부 입장이 그 북미 관계를 근본적으로 상황을 바꿔내거나 이러기는 쉽지는 않은 상황이죠. 그렇지만 북미 관계 개선의 윤활유 역할은 남북 관계 또는 한국 정부의 대북 정책이 할 수 있다. 또 그런 점에서는 제가 볼 때는 지금의 앞으로 12월 대선 이후에 그 한국 정부의 역할은 아마 북미 관계에 저는 긍정적인 북미 관계를 풀어가는 데 있어서 지금보다는 저는 좀 더 긍정적인 역할을 할 가능성이 높다라고 우선 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
Now, I don't think there would be a fundamental change to the relationship that North Korea has with the U.S. It does not matter what type of administration we have in South Korea. We would not want a fundamental change to the relationship that North Korea has with the U.S. However, it is possible for a new administration to play a role of, say, a Greece. We would allow for a change to take place, which would be for an improvement between North Korea and the U.S. And we think whatever change that takes place after December of this year between the two countries of North Korea and the U.S., we believe it would be a positive change.
한국에서 유력한 대선 주자로 부각되고 있는 박근혜 씨 같은 경우도 북한을 방문해서 김정일 위원장을 만난 사람입니다. 그러니까 한국에서 대선 주자 중에서 아마 김정일 위원장을 직접 독대를 한 사람은 박근혜 씨고 그런 점에서 저는 뭔가 북한 문제에 대해서 박근혜 씨가 갖고 있는 입장도 좀 더 전향적일 가능성이 있다고 보고 실제 또 지금 박근혜 씨 주변에 있는 포진에 있는 인물들도 아주 보수적인 그런 사람들이보다는 조금은 현실적인 부분들이 있는 그런 부분입니다. 또 야당 그러니까 DJ 정부와 노무현 정부를 계승한다고 하는 야당의 입장은 좀 더 전향적인 입장을 갖고 있기 때문에 그런 점에서 본다면 한국의 차기 정부는 남관계에 있어서 좀 더 대화 중심으로 갈 것이고 그러한 것이 북미 관계에도 긍정적인 영향을 줄 수 있다. 이 정도로 말씀드릴 수가 있을 것 같습니다.
We have Park Geun-hye, who is the front runner at this time for presidential election. And she actually had been one of those people who have met with Chairman Kim Jong-il when he was alive. And she had a face-to-face meeting with Kim Jong-il. So even if she had become the president, and even if her party, which is rather conservative, had become the party in power, realistically speaking, I believe there would be a more proactive approach towards North Korea. And if it happens that it's the other party, the party who has a long lineage from DJ government and Nomuhyang government, if that opposition party were to come into power, I think they would also pursue a more proactive strategy towards North Korea. So all in all, whatever happens in South Korea in December, I believe there would be a more proactive government towards North Korea, and there would be a more dialogue that's taking place between South Korea and the North Korea, and this would have a positive effect on North Korea-U.S. relations.
북한의 대미 정책과 관련된 부분을 짧게 좀 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 지금 현재 북한에 있어서 가장 중요한 것은 내부적으로 김정은 체제를 조기에 안착시키는 이게 가장 핵심적인 목표라고 보고 그 목표에 의해서 그 목표에 따라서 대미 정책도 지금 조정을 받고 있다라고 저는 보고 있습니다.
So first and foremost, the priority that North Korea has when it comes to its relationship with the U.S., it's stability internally. That they would be pursuing a more stable power bases and stabilized regime in North Korea, and they may seek it through the U.S.
또는 북한의 대남 이명박 대통령에 대한 비난이랄지 또는 내부 결속용 여러 가지 프로그램들은 결국 김정은 체제의 조기 안정을 확보한 뒤에 그 다음에 그 외교 정책을 펼치겠다. 그러니까 북중 관계를 기반으로 하는 외교 정책을 지금 펼치고 그러면서도 핵심은 내부 결속, 내부 김정은 체제의 조기 안정 이것이 가장 중요한 목표이고 나머지는 거기에 현재 종속되고 있는 것 아니냐는 그런 판단입니다.
So whatever North Korea does diplomatically is really what they do externally is really for internal purposes, and they are trying to consolidate the power bases for Kim Jong-un, and the sooner the better, they believe, and that's why I believe there's the instigation with the rocket launching and also continued and higher levels of criticism of the Lee Myung-bak administration. So for North Korea, traditionally they have based their international affairs on North Korea-China relation, and I believe that's going to continue, and all those would be for the purpose of consolidating their power base within North Korea.
쉽게 좀 말씀을 드리면 올해 안에 2012년도 안에는 대체로 내부 결속을 꾀하는 쪽으로 가고 그 과정에서 뭔가 안정성들이 확보된다라면 북한이 저는 그 외부를 향해서 미국과 한국을 향해서 강경 일본도로만 가지는 않을 것이라고 보고 내년 정도 된다면 뭔가 북한도 대화를 하는 쪽으로 방향을 전환할 가능성이 있다. 내부 결속을 올해 정도에 좀 마무리 짓고 그 다음에 대화에 나서면서 뭔가 북한이 그 경제적인 이득이랄지 또는 전반적인 어떤 북한의 현재 상황들을 개선시킬 수 있는 그런 흐름들을 만들어내는 그런 쪽으로 점진적인 그 방향 전환을 할 가능성이 높다. 그렇게 전망을 하고 있습니다.
So the year 2012 would be the year of consolidation. They would be looking for stability internally, and once they have that consolidation in hand, they would be pursuing a dialogue with outside countries. So 2012 consolidation, 2013, I believe they would be willing to engage in more talks with outside, including the U.S. And I don't believe that they could continue on this current path of hardline approach. They would soften up, they will change, and there would be more proactive and progressive approaches towards outside.
Maybe time for one quick or we're going to wrap up on time, are we? We're going to try? Well,
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. So maybe 2 questions if the questions are quick and the responses are quick. So first. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Nadia Chao with the Liberty Time Taiwan. One question that Professor King just mentioned that you basically supported a closer relationship with China. And since China already has a great influence on North Korea issue, I just wonder what's the political calculus from your point of view that a better relationship or engagement with China will have a positive impact on North Korea's issues. How this is going to help South Korea to deal with North Korea. Thank you.
And one last question.
I have a question for Dr. Huang. As the mainland China and Taiwan has signed the economic agreement, the ECFA, like in President Ma's the first term, are you optimistic about the agreement about something about on the political issue or the military issue in President Ma's second term? Because he said in his May 20 the inauguration. The lecture, he said the one country, 2 areas, the one ROC, 2 areas, which means both the Taiwan and mainland are part of the 2 part of the Republic of China. So, do you believe he will talk more about the political and military issue during his second term? And do you believe that the DPP, the Democratic and the Progressive Party, will change their mainland policy in the future? Thank you.
Those are both tough questions to answer concisely, but we're going to try to give brief answers for both. Dr. Kim?
제가 아까 발표한 것 중에서 한 가지 그 오해가 있을 수 있는 부분인 것 같은데요. 한중 관계가 한미 동맹보다 더 중요하다 이렇게 보지는 않습니다. 저는 이제 한중 관계가 과거에 비해서는 상당 부분 발전해야 된다라고 하는 것을 말씀드리는 겁니다. 한미 동맹의 그 중요성을 약화시키자는 것이 아니고 한미 동맹을 강화시키면서 한중 협력을 보다 확대 심화시킬 수 있는 그것이 대단히 중요하다라고 보고 있는 겁니다.
I need to make a correction before I leave a wrong impression as to what I wanted to say earlier. I'm not trying to say that the South Korea-U.S. relationship needs to be diluted in any way. I believe South Korea-U.S. relationship should remain strong, and that it's an important part of Korea's continuous progress. But what I'm trying to say is that the South Korea-China relationship has to evolve, that it has got to get stronger. So it's not to say that at the expense of South Korea-U.S. relationship that South Korea-China relationship should improve, but that South Korea and China relationship needs to improve on its own, and this would be in addition to a strong relationship South Korea has with the U.S.
간단하게 이제 한중 관계가 어떻게 북핵 문제 또는 북한 문제 해결에 도움이 되느냐 하는 부분을 좀 말씀드리면 아주 현실적으로 북한의 대중 의존도가 경제 부분에 있어서는 아까 속국이라는 표현까지도 아까 나온 것 같습니다만 저는 뭐 이제 상당 부분 이제 중국 의존도의 심화라고 하는 부분 그리고 정치적으로 외교적으로 군사적으로도 북한의 대중 의존도가 심화되는 이런 흐름들을 현실적으로 막기 어려운 상태이고 또 그런 상황이 전개되는 과정에서 북한 문제를 풀어가는 데 있어서 한국의 그 중국과의 협력 구도는 앞으로 더 중요하면 중요했지 그것이 약화되지는 않을 것이다. 더 중요하게 갈 수밖에 없는 것이 현실이다라고 보고 있습니다.
The question as to how a improved relationship between South Korea and China could contribute towards the resolution of the North Korea so-called North Korea issue. We have to remember that North Korea is relying heavily on China for a lot of things. As far as economics are concerned, it's almost as if North Korea is becoming a tributary of China in a certain sense. That's how much of a economic dependency that North Korea has on China, but not only on the economic front, but also on other fronts such as politics, foreign affairs, military. North Korea has been relying on and depending on China, and this seems to also get deepen. This type of reliance is getting deeper, and it's not a current that one could stop at will. And this will continue on. That is why an improved relationship with South Korea and China is a very important. Will play a very important role in resolving the so-called North Korea problem.
한중의 이해 일치, 그러니까 한중 간에 뭔가 북한 문제에 대한 상호 간의 입장의 그 일치, 나아가서는 한미 중의 의견의 일치, 이 지점들을 최대한 많이 확보해내는 이런 과정들 또는 그런 것을 최대한 빨리 확보해 나가는 이런 노력들이 결국 북한 문제를 풀어가는 데 있어서 그 문제를 풀어가는 그런 근본적인 그 방식이다라고 하는 부분을 말씀드릴 수밖에 없다고 봅니다. 물론 북한 내부의 변화도 우리가 기대를 해야 되는 부분이 분명히 있지만 그 한미 중에 그 협력적인 외교, 대북 외교 또는 압박, 설득 이런 것들이 앞으로 상당히 중요하다라는 말씀으로 제 그 답을 대신하겠습니다.
So how does an improved relationship between South Korea and China help towards the resolution of the North Korean problem? Well, I think it's important for a consensus to be reached between China and South Korea as to the issues facing the two countries when it comes to North Korea. And further, if there could be a consensus reached amongst China, South Korea, and the U.S., I believe we would be able to find certain common denominators in order to resolve the North Korean problem. So in one sense, we could expect or anticipate some changes to come from internally of North Korea, but that's not something we would be pursuing. What we would be pursuing is external pressure, external discussion, external diplomacy, where South Korea, China, and perhaps even U.S. come together to bring about changes in North Korea.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. The economic agreement you just mentioned, signed by the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, is called the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, ECFA, which leads me to a response to Mr. Mike Vante's previous comments on those agreements on initiatives signed by Taiwan during the previous administration. I think probably you were talking about the Megaport initiative or a CSI, something like that. But nuclear security cooperation, health and medical cooperation, etc., are one of the and ECFA are those of the 16 agreements signed by the two Far-South organizations on the both sides representing each other's government. So I believe that's why I said actually South Korea and neighboring countries in the Asia-Pacific can learn from the interaction model between Taiwan and mainland China so that in the future, if they have such a need to talk about relevant issues with mainland China, they know what mainland China's real concern is and how to deal with mainland China more successfully. And after ECFA, I personally, of course, do not exclude the possibility of further political and military interactions between the two sides. But I think the possibility is very, very small. Partially because President Ma is troubled with a lot of reform programs domestically, and partially because current closer relations between mainland China and Taiwan will not lead to ultimate unification of China. Why? Because the institutions, politically, socially, and economically, the institutions between the two sides, their difference is too huge to ignore. So without further democratization in mainland China, I really don't see a great, bright future for the two sides of the Taiwan Strait to engage politically and militarily in the near term, in the short term. And whether or not the opposition party, major opposition party of Taiwan, DPP, will change its mainland China policy, I think so. Because in the previous presidential elections in the past January, I think the DPP suffered a little bit from its rigid mainland China policy. So I believe DPP is going to change a little bit about its mainland China policy in order to garner more support in the next presidential election in 2016.
Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you to KEI and Sarah and Russell for your help putting this together. And thank you all for your participation.
Thank you everyone for your patience. The technical difficulties.